So today I want to talk about uh okay, this is what I've been thinking of. The origins of God. What does God mean? Where does it come from? The etymology. Um, what does it represent? To give some context, I was thinking of what God is. Is God something that's incorporeal, something that's non-physical? But that's not true, right? Because spirit is also invisible. Air, atmosphere is also invisible. But we don't consider air, spirit, the same as God. Not today, right? Not colloquially. Which means, right, God isn't something that's incorporeal, right? Something that you can't see. So is God an omnipotent force? Well, that's not true either, right? Because hurricanes, right? It's an omnipotent force, right? Forces of nature. Or things like angry spirits, right? Demons, angels, right? They're very powerful. Demons, angels, they're extremely powerful. But we don't consider them gods, right? So God isn't something that's non-visible. God is not something that's all-powerful. So what is God, right? Um, and I was really wrapping my head around this, right? Thinking of Greek gods, Egyptian gods, Norse gods, Hindu gods. Um, just thinking of what the heck, right? What is this concept of God, right? What is this? What are we actually referring to? So when um, we look at the etymology of God, it comes, I believe, you can double check me on this, but it comes from, I was checking, Norse or Old English for got, and that comes from Proto-Indo-European, PIE, meaning, or something like goat or got, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it comes from the word to say, right? To invoke, to summon, which means it's something you're like God. You're summoning a spirit entity energy, right? A being, right? I kind of like to think of it like a video game, right? A summon, right? Like Final Fantasy, right? You're summoning like Zodiac, right? You're summoning an archangel, right? Behemoth. So when I look at the other etymology for God, which is Deus, right? Deus, Theos, Deus, Latin, Theos, Greek, or Deva from Hindu, which is this is all Indo-European. Um, it comes from the Indo-European word. I think it's dyat or dut. Don't know how to pronounce it, but it's to shine, um, to like too bright, right? To shine. So kind of like the sun. And when I kind of combine these concepts together, right? Deus, Theos, Deva, God, goat. When I combine all these concepts together, right, to create like the um, sort of like the total image of God, what does it actually mean? What does God mean? Or the origins, right? The etymology of God. I get like a picture of Genesis, right? When I refer to Genesis, right? And then God said, let there be light, right? So you're speaking, right? You're invoking, but you're also shining, right? So you're speaking, the speech comes from God, right? The etymology of God. The light, right? The let there be light comes from Deus, right? The shining. So when you combine those concepts together, right? That's totally what happens in Genesis, right? And God said, right? Speech, let there be light, right? Shining. So speech and shining. And then when I combine those concepts together, right? When I combine that totality together, it's like a right? And it's an like an expulsion. right? You're invoking something. So it's exactly the same concept as yang, right? In yin and yang, right? Taoism, yang is yin is the darkness, right? The feminine, the passive. Yang is the bright, the active, the masculine, right? So yin, yang, yin, yang. Yang is the principle of lightness, right? The sun, of speech, right? Which totally makes sense. Which means Deus, right? Theos, Deva, God. Also bringing in like Japanese, kami, which is so not just Indo-European, but kami, which means the sort of the etymology for it is like to pronounce, right? To say, to speak, right? Kami is to speak. It's like speech, meaning, right? The whole concept of God is about speaking, invoking, right? To shine. It's an external, right? You're using, it's an active force, right? So it's yang, right? God is a concept of yang, right? You're invoking, which totally makes sense. Because in the Hebrew Bible, for example, Elohim, right? Elohim, or Yahweh, the personal name, the Hebrew God is very masculine, right? Very masculine. The Christian God, which derives from the Hebrew God, is also masculine, right? So it's like this principle of masculinity. Deus, God, Deva, is a masculine principle, right? Now, of course, Deva is a little bit of a different concept. It's just talking about the six realms of Buddhism. You know, Deva is like the most powerful beings, right? Naraka is like sort of you can sort of translate it as hell. It goes from Naraka to Deva, but you know, basically Devas, to simplify the concept, right? They live long, they're powerful. So in that sort of sense, it comes from the same root. So it's like external power, right? I would like to call it, I call it externality, or yang, the yang principle, right? So all this concept of God, there's a lot of what would I call it? Psychology behind it, right? Sort of like personifying different aspects of humans, right? So like wrath, anger, right? War, personifying wisdom, personifying intelligence, right? You're personifying a lot of things, but in general, God, the etymology, represents like this external, the yang force, right? The masculinity. So then what is yin, right? So yin is like that passive, right? The female, the obscure, the dark force. So of course, in a lot of mythologies, there's the sun god and the moon goddess, right? Usually, not always, but usually. Or there's the sky god and the earth goddess, right? And so kind of going through like kind of asking myself these questions, right? What is God really talking about? I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it's talking about, the yin and the yang, right? Or duality, right? I'm just using yin and yang, but just that duality, right? The dual principle, the active and the passive, right? The masculine and the feminine. No, we do have female goddesses, right? Athena or Namu, Ishtar, right? We have female goddesses, but they're still externalizing, right? They're external, right? So I like to think of it as external and internal, right? Today we would call it external, internal. So for example, in the Greek pantheon, Zeus is the strongest, right? The top dog. Odin in the Norse pantheon is the top dog, right? So that's external, right? But they're not the center, right? The center is actually the fates, right? The moirai, the norns, right? Not even Zeus, um, not even Zeus can escape fate, the moirai, which means, right? Even though Zeus is the strongest, right, the most external, he's not the center, right? So I think of it as external, internal, or top and center. The top is the strongest, but the center is the most encompassing, right? So kind of in Buddhism, this is like the same concept, right? Devas are the strongest, powerful, most long-lived beings, right? But they're still stuck in the wheel of samsara, right? They're still stuck in the wheel. So you have like a circle, right? You have a circle. Devas are at the top of the wheel, right? But they're still in the wheel, right? In the center is the Buddha, right? Which is a title, right? Buddha is a title. They escaped the wheel of samsara, right? They're totally in the center, right? They're not anywhere on the wheel. They're in the center, right? So this is the difference between top and center. The top is Zeus. The center is the Fates, right? The top is Odin. The center is the Norns. The top is Deva. The center is the Buddha, right? And so it's, just representing that yin yang principle once again, right? So I think this concept of God comes from the yang, right? The active principle, right? The active agent, so to say. This is where my second theory comes in. These are all just theories, but when it comes to, um, for example, our modern world, I think that we've become very masculine oriented, right? Notice I didn't say male, right? I'm not talking about your gender. I'm not talking about your biological sex. I'm talking about energy. I know energy is I know it's a very elusive, very abstract concept, but that's kind of the point, right? That's kind of the point. Masculine, right? Masculinity is very solid, right? It's very rigid. It's very stable. Femininity is very loose, right? Very creative, right? Very elusive, right? It's very obscure. So that's why I intentionally said masculine and not male. Why do I say this? Right? It's just a theory, but in the modern world, so we have the Abrahamic faiths, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and we also have science, right? These are all very external, right? Very masculine, active energies, right? The biblical God, right? Old Testament, New Testament, it's very masculine, right? The science, right? The pursuit of science is very external, right? You're looking at outside, right? You're looking outside. Um, it's a very masculine, yang pursuit, right? Contrast that to like inner, right? The inner self, the meditation, inner self, right? The Buddha, Jesus, right? That's a very internal, right? Very feminine pursuit. Of course, I'm just using, in reality, internal and external are the same thing in reality. There's no difference, right? Every internal has an external, every external has an internal, right? Every north has a south, every south has a north. But I'm just using these terms to make them make them easier to grasp. So I believe, right? It's just a personal theory. Our modern world has become very masculine, very external oriented, which is that's one of the aspects of humanity, right? But we need that balance, right? The internal, the feminine balance. And so, I thought it was really interesting, for example, that back then, for example, Mesopotamia, right, Sumer, we had depictions of goddesses like Namu and Tiamat, which are the same goddess, or in Hindu mythology, right, Durga and Kali. They represent two aspects of femininity, right? The Namu or Durga, right, which is like the um, nurturing, loving mother, right? The very what we consider today as feminine. But there was also the Tiamat, right, or Kali, right, the destroyer of worlds, the to put it more abstractly, right, the destroyer of illusion, right. It's like it's a creative, destructive force, right. So it was a more like balanced perspective of femininity. So I thought it was interesting that older cultures depicted feminine, right? The to put it simply, the two aspects of femininity, right? The creative, nurturing aspect and the creative, destructive aspect. Um, to put it into scientific terms, right? It's like when a forest fire happens. A forest fire is very destructive, right? It burns all the forest, right? It burns down all the trees. But then, because everything was burnt, the soil gets renewed. Right? All the nutrients return to the soil, and then new life, springs out from the ashes of the old. Right? It's like a phoenix. That kind of like Ouroboros phoenix, right? The reincarnation, reinvigoration. So I thought it was very interesting that creation and destruction are actually two aspects of the same thing, right? Creation and destruction are the same thing, right? Two sides of the same coin. And why do I say this? It's because um, we're lacking that balance in today's society, right? We're all about creation, right? We're all about production, right? Creation, but we're not really about destruction, right? Creative destruction, right? We don't really do creative destruction anymore, um, right? Which is causing our society to become very. This is just a personal theory, but it's causing our society to be very ossified, right? Very calcified. It's causing our society to be very rigid. You need some rigidity, of course, right? But you also need some flexibility, which we don't really have in our society. So this is where I come to my final theory, right? These are all just theories, right? The yin and the yang, God being the yang principle, right? And us missing the yin, the feminine principle. Um, us missing this creative destruction, right? This we usually think of destruction as evil, right? But destruction, even though it might not be preferable, right? It might not be something we want. It might lead to better results, right? Later on. This is what the Native Americans, right? The Plain Indians knew, right? They practiced regenerative or prescribed burning, right? They burned their prairies, right? So new seeds, new plants would pop up. And of course, this is different from region to region, obviously, right? Some places are more prone to burning, some places are less prone to burning, of course. But it seems like these indigenous cultures, we're all indigenous, but they knew of the power of destruction, right? Creative destruction. So I come to this last theory, right, which is about this is probably the most out there theory, just a theory. I believe, right, we're getting more technologically sophisticated, right? We went from steam engines, locomotives, right, mass production, assembly lines. We went from there to planes, rockets, internet, satellites, GPS. Um, Now we're getting to AI, right? Computation, cloud, um, decentralized finance, right? All these, amazing technologies, right? It seems like technology is accelerating. At the same moment, I believe our human potential is funneled, right? It's increasingly narrowed, right? Our human potential is being shoved into one single funnel. I make an analogy to monoculture, right? Monoculture, like the huge, hundreds of miles of cornfields that we have in the Midwest in America. Monoculture is very efficient, right? It's very efficient, but what are the costs, right? What are the benefits? What are the costs of producing monoculture, right? It creates that fragility, right? So this is kind of like the balance between efficiency and resilience, right? Or anti-fragile. Monocultures are very efficient, right? Because you have one crop, right? Not just one crop, one specific type of one specific crop, right? I think it's yellow dent number 5, right? It's one, or Monsanto's GMO crops, right? Well, not Monsanto anymore, but right, it's just one specific type of corn. So it's very efficient, but it's very fragile, right? One disease can wipe out the entire corn production of the Midwest, right? Just one disease. So it's very efficient, but it's really fragile. It's similar to our society today, right? We're very technologically advanced, right? Getting close to, you know, almost superhuman powers, right? Having rockets going to the moon, satellites, internet, right? It's very, it's magic. Basically, it's magic. On the flip side, these global supply chains, right? They make us very fragile, right? Because we have these huge bottlenecks in our supply chain, right? And for example, with the Suez Canal, right? Or the Panama, right? If one ship gets stuck, right? Like we saw, I think last year, yeah, we saw last year, the whole supply chain gets screwed, right? The entire supply chain gets screwed with one boat. So it's very efficient, but it's very fragile, right? Efficiency and resilience aren't opposites. They're not opposites, but in today's world, right? In today's world, right, of convenience, which is also, I'm not saying any of these are bad, not at all, right? Uh, but what is the cost, right? We get huge benefits, right? Convenience, entertainment, but what's the cost, right? What's the ecological, social, economical? What are the costs, right? And so, right, this comes to my final theory, which is the simultaneous acceleration and diminishing of human potential. We're accelerating and diminishing human potential at the same time. So a good analogy would be cells, right? When we're young, very, very young, we have pluripotent cells, right? Our cells can turn into anything, right? They can turn into blood cells, kidney cells, liver cells, brain cells, skin cells, right? They can turn into anything. They're pluripotent. But as we grow older, our cells mature, right? Our cells mature and they, they become they become one type of cell, right? Just a skin cell, just a eye cell, right? I'm simplifying, of course. I'm simplifying, but they become one type of cell. So when our cells mature, right, their potential accelerates, right? Instead of being a pluripotent cell, they become, let's say, um, a lymphocyte, right? Or they become a hepatocyte, right? They become a specific type of cell, right? Which increases their potential, right? Because now they're really good at doing that one thing, but it also decreases their potential, right? Because They're not pluripotent anymore, right? They can only do one thing, right? It's the same with humanity. We are becoming better, right? More sophisticated technologically speaking, right? With, as I said, AI, cloud computing, decentralized finance, all these things, right? They make us more, they accelerate human technology. And at the very same moment, they funnel us into one specific type of humanity, right? They both accelerate us towards a specific niche, right? At the same moment, it diminishes all other niches, right? So it's kind of like a homogenization, right? A homogenization or a monoculture or a global society, right? On one level, right, we're accelerating, right? We're becoming mature as a society, as a species, right? We're maturing as a cell, right? At the very same moment, we diminish all our other potentials, right? We can't become we can't become a we can't become a neuron anymore, right? Um, we can't become bone marrow anymore, right? We can't become skin cells anymore. Right? We can't become any of these, right? We can only be a lung cell. We can only be a ovarian cell. We can only be, um, we accelerate and reduce our potential at the same time. So this is where my final theory comes in. I believe, just a theory, that this kind of invokes a maturing of our species, both in good and bad, right? Negative, positive ways. It's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it's just another thing. Perhaps, right, perhaps, we'll become like a quasi hive mind, right? Kind of like the Borg, or kind of like Evangelion's third impact, right? All the humans become a collective consciousness, right? Collective consciousness, right? Each of us becomes like a cell of a super organism, right? Call it Gaia, right? Gaia or Earth or Numa, Namu. Um, I think this is one possibility, right? As our human bodies, right, as we as individuals mature, right, our cells become specialized, right? They become specialized and they become hyper focused, right? They can do one thing, only one thing, but they can do it very well, right? Human society could turn out exactly like that, where we start specializing and specializing and specializing to the point where each individual human becomes a cell of a collective humanity, right? So, like a collective consciousness. That's one possibility, certainly. Another possibility, previously mentioned, right? Like where humanity gains both the masculine, right? The yang principle, and also the yin, the feminine principle as well. I'm kind of borrowing the wings from, I believe it's some, I'm not sure of the names, but tribes of the Amazon, right? The shamans. That's another distinct possibility. One possibility is like a collective consciousness, a singularity, a hive mind of humanity. Another possibility is the masculine, feminine wings of liberation, right? Kind of like every person awakening, right? Enlightenment. Another possibility is it just remains the same, right? The same old, right? These are all possible. I don't want to go too much into like predictions, right? Like Nostradamus. But I thought it was really interesting how I can how there's analogies of humanity to cellular biology, right? How there's analogies to yin and yang, Yahweh, gods, Deus, Deva. I thought it was very interesting how these concepts kind of come about. I think the big takeaway here, I think the big takeaway is uh, really it's all these are ways, all these concepts, ideas are ways of uh, making sense of what's happening. It's exactly like the analogy of the blind men and the elephant, right? One blind man touches the trunk, right? He thinks, oh, it's a tree, right? Because it's really, it's big and hard. Another person touches or I guess it would be a snake because it's wiggling. Another person touches the leg and it's like, oh, that's a tree, right? Another person touches the tail and it's like, oh, um, that's a peacock because it's really light and fluffy, right? Uh, Perhaps all of these are true, right? Perhaps, right? The hive mind and the feminine masculine balance and everything being the same. Perhaps it's all true. It's just different ways of interpreting the same event. So I just thought this was very interesting. The Just how all these ideas coalesce, combine together.